good time to start. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, again, to all of you participants, dear guests, also partner organizations. Without further ado, I would pass the floor to our ETF director, Pilvi Torsti, for some opening remarks. Pilvi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie. And good afternoon, everyone, dear participants, and also the speakers and contributors of this webinar. So very welcome, first of all, to all distinguished guests from partner organizations, and thank you for the interest that you've taken of this webinar organized by the ETF European Training Foundation. ETF, since it was started its work as an European agency, was originally 30 years ago in particular set up to support the work on vocational education and training and employment policies. Today we are covering 27 partner countries in the borders of Europe, from Central Asia to Mediterranean region, Northern Africa, and of course Western Balkans, Ukraine. But world has, of course, changed. While we used to talk about the policy areas related to vet skills and employment policies, today we cannot leave education from this discussion. So actually, as a director, I note very often using a phrase, education skills and employment policies, education skills, employment and training policies, because we need that type of view when we actually to understand what has evolved. So what has evolved in these 30 years that since ETF was created, and in particular probably in the last 10, 15 years, is that we have had many emerging topics: climate change, digital transition, recently geopolitical tensions, increasing inequalities. None of them is an abstract challenge these days, and they are really affecting the lives of citizens and the resilience also of societies and futures of the economies. And this changes quite fundamentally the role of education and training systems, or it should change probably. In these opening remarks, I thought to say a few words about the expectations hence we now have for the systems because of the changed realities. And then the approach we've chosen as ETF to look at the skills continuum, education continuum in a holistic manner. And then thirdly, quickly also about today's agenda. But first about the expectations for the systems. I think it's fundamental to recognize that the education and training systems are no longer asked only to prepare people for jobs. They are increasingly expected to prepare people for life, for complexity, for uncertainty, and for responsibility. And that's working life, that's life as a citizen in various forms. And of course, this resonates with the European Commission's vision as it is expressed in the key policy of the current college, the Union of Skills. Not only to upskill and reskill adults, but to build solid foundations for youth equally. And that is why at ETF, we believe that the question is not simply what are the kind of type of skills we develop, but also how we develop those across people's entire learning journeys or life cycles. And I think here it's important to know this, that the role of the education providers is also vital to be recognized, because with such emerging skills needs and expectations in these transitions, we will also need to look at the different providers from early education to adult education and their roles slightly from a different and a holistic angle. And we need kind of a skills ecosystem where you have the various contributors having their different roles in a systemic level to be able to cope with the expectation that is so incredibly actually large these days for the skills provision. And that recognition of the different players is also built on the idea that skills are built over time. Starting from early childhood, continuing through school, vocational education and higher education, and extending into lifelong learning and adult educations. And their foundational skills are, of course, key because they prepare the ground for technical skills. And skills are shaped not only in classrooms, but we know how much informal settings such as families, communities, or workplace actually matter. And that's why the ETF approach that we've taken has been very much stressing the idea of a skills continuum and also a global education approach. I think a good example actually on this is to look at a little bit, to stop for a second on the green skills as an example about the starting from early childhood and coming to adult education. That what does it actually mean if we look at the green skills as an example? It means that in the early education, primary education, we mainly look at, I mean, our goal is awareness of those of the area. Then when we move to vocational education or general education, the secondary level of education, we are looking at core competencies within the field of green skills. And then when we move to higher education, we start to look into a highly specific technical skills. And finally, in the adult education, because the green skills was not necessarily there when the current adults were actually doing their early education to diploma education. So we need to cover in a way all the elements from awareness to core competencies to highly developed technical skills. So this, in a way, is, and of course, inspiring analysis as well for global education approach, because it means that societies with very different, probably, level of development or economic status have very similar questions to tackle with, because they have to bring a meaningful ecosystem, skills ecosystem, to answer the requirements that are put forward by, for instance, the green skills agenda or the twin transition agenda. So hence, coming back to the holistic ETF approach, for us, the education, global education really means connecting the different dimensions that we have often historically perhaps treated separately in the debates on education and employment and training. And that is education and skills, economic and social objectives, employability and citizenship. This means recognizing that skills are not only about productivity, but really a core element, of course, also concerning sustainability, inclusion, and active participation in society, which, by the way, we of course know in many societies are building blocks of the competitiveness and economic success as well. So with the expectation for the skills needs with the ETF holistic approach, one has to still say that this type of vision, while it's increasingly recognized these days, when we look at the realities on the ground, we find fragmentations. Policies are developed in silos. We, of course, have ministry structures that also often support those silos, and therefore learning environments remain disconnected. We often also know a bit too little about how the education and training system actually ensure continuity in skills development across levels and context. For instance, between vocational education on a secondary level and that of applied science, and or other examples, of course, can be found depending a little bit of the nature of the system. And so this is exactly why the work we are presenting here matters and brings us sort of new starting points. So I come from my analysis of the changed expectations and the ETF holistic approach now to the today's agenda. We have two studies that we will discuss, providing new evidence on these issues. One looks across countries to understand how skills are embedded in the national strategies. The alignment of education and skills agendas, of course, matters because it determines whether national policies really translate into coherent skills outcomes, namely that whether the education provisions and the analysis of the skills needs really meet. The other study dives into the continuum cuisine, as colleagues have put it, assessing how a specific competence, in this case sustainability, is developed across education systems, ensuring that the skills continuum, ensuring that there is the skills continuum in a way we were just describing. So what we aim to do with this work is not only to analyze, but also trigger reflection. to help countries to strengthen coherence across their education and skill systems, not only for the economic competitiveness motives, but also really for the individuals and society's well-being. Again, those two always being interlinked. And we want to get reflection on the identification of practical levers for integrating learning across levels and environments. And of course, then to contribute to a more informed and connected global discussion. So, dear colleagues, distinguished participants, that's what today's webinar really is about. It's part of this effort. We hope that this is really a beginning of the journey. In November, there will be a next step along the way. Here at ETF, we will organize a Torino Skills Summit, which offers a high-level opportunity to build on the findings and continue the conversation we are beginning today. And of course, we also should look a little bit of the global context here as we move forward, because the revision of the SDGs for the post-2030 development agenda is also about to begin. And this is, of course, part of that discussion from the European perspective that we are bringing forward here today. And we definitely want and we must ensure that the skills development and also correct sort of holistically driven analysis, it has a prominent place in that path. So with this word, a little bit analysis of the expectations, describing the approach we've taken as ETF, looking from the holistic skills continuum, education continuum, different providers perspective, different segments of the society perspective, and finally having then also now 2 studies that we take this agenda forward. Thank you very much on my behalf, and all the best for the event, and back to you, Marie.
Thank you very much, dear Pirvi. And now I would briefly introduce, if you will agree, the agenda for this afternoon, along with some few practical points to support a smooth and engaging discussion. So over the next half hour, the teams leading the 2 studies will present these studies to you. They'll present the work, the findings, especially the methodology, the findings, and some recommendations for further reflection. I won't present them because they will do that. And Pilvi, our director, already did that also. Then after, given the diversity of the audience and in order to maintain everyone's engagement, we have chosen also not to go too much into the country-specific technicalities, although these 2 studies took some country cases, as we will explain, but this will be available in the reports, obviously. Then for making sure that you can also raise your questions, you have the chat available. Please, as the 2 presentations will be rolled out, don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. And you could also put some likes, some thumbs up to reactions to prioritize the questions you would like to see addressed. We will respond directly to them when it's possible, or we will take a time of questions and answer after the 2 presentations are completed. Following this exchange, we also thought it would be interesting to convey some distinguished speakers from our partner organizations to have a panel discussion around the topics raised by these 2 studies. And our head of unit, Hugues Moussy, will guide us through this panel discussion. And then we will conclude around 3:30 our time, meaning our Turin's time, meaning the Central Europe summertime. And we would at that point thank you all for your attendance and participation. So without further ado, I'm pleased to give the floor to my colleague Elma Agar, who is Human Capital Development expert, and to Nina Brankovic, the consultant who supported the work on the first study. They will present the conclusions of this analytical mapping on skills strategies and related policy frameworks. Elma, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Marie. Could you just confirm that you hear me, and then I will continue with the...
Perfectly.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. So my name is Elma Aga. I work as Human Capital Development expert in the Intelligence Unit at ETF. And I'm pleased to be here today with Nina Brankovic, who's the ETF consultant working on the research and analysis behind this report. So today we will present you some of the findings of the ETF cross-country report on the strategic alignment across education and skills agendas. This is a report that draws on almost 100 policy documents, including the education strategies, ed strategies, employment strategies, across all ETF partner countries, based on an initial mapping of almost 250 strategies. So let me walk you through of what we will cover on today's presentation. So we will start by explaining a bit the background of this study. Then we will go to explain the methodology, which is built on two analytical frameworks. So we'll explain one is the skills framework and one is an alignment framework per country. Then we will go a bit deeper into the findings by document type. And then we'll see again with the findings on the alignment typology, which will be explained by Nina. And finally, we will go into the conclusions and recommendations from the study. Let's start with the background. So as I said, this assignment is conducted under the ETF Global Education Cluster, covering 27 ETF partner countries. And so this work tries to contribute to ETF's growing focus on aligning education systems with emerging societal, technological, and labor market challenges across its partner countries. We find that aligning the education, skills, employment agendas is critical to avoid fragmentation in policy delivery, to ensure efficient use of resources, and create coherent pathways for lifelong learning and workforce development. A more integrated approach strengthens the capacity of education systems to equip individuals with relevant competencies for both economic participation and also personal development. And we think that a coherent articulation between education and skills agendas can determine whether the national policies can translate into coherent skills outcomes. In cases where coordination is weak, we observe, for instance, parallel KPI systems, duplicated financing, or fragmented governance. So therefore, we had as a central question to answer to what extent education and skills agendas are coherently articulated and coordinated across ETF partner countries, and what are the patterns that emerge across these policy documents currently in force. So, as I said, we had the coverage across all the regions that ETF partner countries cover, and we did the initial mapping with hundreds of documents, and in the end, there were around 100 that were selected. This is also just to give you an idea of all the countries that are covered. For those that are familiar with the ETF region, these are the ETF partner countries. So to go a bit deeper into the methodology, as I mentioned earlier, it rests on two analytical frameworks, which are applied sequentially across each of the 27 country sets. So first, we have the skills analytical framework, and this is applied per document. So as we mentioned, each of the 99 selected documents, they were assessed individually against 5 criteria. So as these documents were education strategies, national strategies, VET national strategies, and employment strategies. And also we wanted to have a look at sectoral strategies such as green, digital. So some of these 5 criteria were included policy objectives. So for instance, is skills development explicitly included in the strategic goals? Planned activities, whether there are concrete actions targeting skills development, then at key performance indicators, whether there are measurable indicators defined, what are the main indicators and targets. Then we look at budget. We see whether there is a dedicated budget line for skills, and if the strategy is costed, and if the budget makes sense. And finally, we look if there are mechanisms on monitoring and evaluation to track progress and adjust intervention. Then we go on to the stage 2, which is the alignment framework, which is applied per each country. So once we did the skills analytical framework for each document, then we look at all the documents together and we see the alignment for each of these 8 dimensions. So we have a strategic vision. We see whether the strategies, they share common goals or they reference each other. Then we look at the governance and coordination, whether the same ministries are involved. Are there cross-sectoral or donor coordination mechanisms in place? Look at the target groups, the implementation instruments, financing, monitoring and evaluation. For instance, are joint indicators or follow-up mechanisms used, shared databases. Look at the lifelong learning, whether it's promoted, whether there are formal or non-formal pathways linked. And donor and innovation, we see whether there are joint donor programs or integrated policy initiatives present. So as I said, these 2 stages work together. Stage 1 tells us how each document treats skills on its own. And then looking at stage 2 tells us how these documents connect or fail to connect within each country. So now we will let you know what are the takeaways that come out after doing this analysis. And for this, I'll leave the floor to Nina to go deeper into that.
Thank you, Elma. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nina Brankovic. I'm ETF consultant on this research and a study. I'm really happy to be today with you, and I really enjoy doing this research and writing the comparative report. We have found very interesting data that I will present here. And of course, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to read the report once it's publicly available. So I will start with looking at the document types, what Elma just explained, just how to move just a second, to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So when it comes to the document types, we analyzed education strategies and found that the education strategies are predominantly system-oriented, focused on quality, inclusion, governance, and curriculum. And in many countries, SETS, vocational education and training is delegated to separate strategy. And foundation skills tend to be better embedded than vocational ones. The second one are vocational education or skill strategies. They are most operationally developed documents across the countries in the sample, where they exist in operational form. For example, Georgia, Jordan, Montenegro, Turkey, all other countries you will see in the report explaining the examples. But where the vocational education and training document is a legal instrument, like for example in Algeria, rather than a strategy, because we couldn't find I was not able to find a publicly available strategy, operational depth is a bit lower compared to the strategic approach. The third one are employment strategies. Employment strategies treat skills as a labor market activation instrument. Their KPI frameworks are the strongest of any document type, although supply-demand linkage is better articulated than implemented, than put in operation. So, but what we also saw, it's these cross-cutting themes, digital and green skills. So when it comes to the digital skills are the most consistent treated theme in a sample. Almost every country has at least one strategy or one policy document that addresses these skills, usually reinforced by dedicated digital agenda. But universal recognition coexists with fragmented delivery, separate indicators, separate budgets, in some cases, unclear-led ministries. This combination makes digital skills the most practical entry point for moving from the strategic intent to operational alignment. This is a bit different when it comes to the green skills, because the green skills are broad, but operational response is less developed. Strategies typically identify future workforce needs without translating them into specific programs within the strategic framework. In the report, you have examples for each of these because the intention is to explain which countries address on their way different cross-cutting themes as a potential for a learning pathway. So now I will move briefly in alignment typology. So this is a country-level findings from the alignment framework. The first set, as Elma explained, was focused on different document types, and we analyzed them through the document type. Now, the second one is alignment typology, which actually explain a country-level alignment. So according to the criteria, we group the countries in type A, type D, and type C. Type A are operational, vocational, and skills framework, which covers like 12 countries. They share an operational, vocational education or skills framework that connects the wider policy architecture with strategic vision aligned across documents. Type B asks other countries that strategically align but institutionally have segmented skills because the skills are recognized as a strategic priority, but the relevant strategy operate on parallel tracks. Within the group, variation is significant. The type C represents the group where the structurally constrained issues present. They're united by structural conditions, a little bit specific conflict, fragility, governance fragmentation, or older legal instruments. So this is how we divided them into three groups. But typology reflects patterns in the review document set, not comparative assessment of the national policy capacities, which is very important to take into consideration. So we included, this is the table with different countries where this explained, but it's very small intentionally because we want to invite you to read the full report, because behind each rating, there is a story behind about each country. So this is a gentle nudge to read the full report. So these are the alignment scores type B and type C. And then we are going to the next slide. 3 enabling factors for stronger alignment. This is very interesting. I found it very interesting. So the first one is the most consistent across the sample is EU prospect, EU accession prospect. In countries with active enlargement or accession processes, like within the Western Balkan, Moldova, Ukraine, Kosovo, reporting obligations have supported stronger indicators development and more regular strategy renewal cycles. The second group are designated skills government body. The second is a formal cross-country ministry mandate. Where it exists, it shifts coordination from an ad hoc to more institutionally related coordination. For example, Jordan, North Macedonia's human capital strategy illustrate this pattern. And then we have a third one, centrally coordinated reform, where a national development strategy or government-wide framework sets the direction for sectoral strategies. The pathway supports comparable alignment outcomes by providing a shared strategic reference across ministries. So these are the 3 types of the enabling factors for for stronger alignment when it comes to the country level. Then we also wanted to see what could be the weaker alignment dimensions. And when it comes to the weak alignment dimensions, there are also three. The one is financing integration. Skill-specific budget lines are absent or only partially defined in most countries' sets. There are a few exceptions, which are included in the report, like Palestine National Employment Strategy or Armenian Employment Plan. The other one is a joint monitoring and evaluation. Harmonized KPI systems are rare, concentrated mainly in countries with EU accession prospect. It doesn't mean that countries do not have different monitoring and evaluation systems, but they are not aligned properly across the documents. The third is donor engagement and policy innovation. Donor activity is present in most countries, but as separate streams rather than integrated mechanisms. When it comes to the alignment, these three weaknesses are interlinked. Addressing them together offers the most substantial alignment gains for all countries. I'm now coming to the conclusion or key takeaways and some recommendations, maybe some discussion points afterwards. So these are the 5 cross-cutting takeaways. The first one is the strategic vision is broadly shared, but operational integration is not. Governance, financing, and monitoring operate in parallel, as I said in the previous slide. Second, the vocational education or skill strategy is the practical foundation for alignment, but it exists in operational form. The third one, financing integration is the single most consistent weakness across the countries. Fourth, joint monitoring and evaluation is structurally underdeveloped, with EU accession prospect as the clearest enabling factor. And finally, the fifth one, digital skills are the most universal addressed theme and the most under-leveraged entry point for cross-sector alignment. And coming back to the 5 priority areas, for policy and developing partner support. The first one is to strengthen the vocational education or skill strategy layer. Where a country lacks a current operational vocational strategy, supporting its development is the single most effective alignment investment. Second, institutionalize interministerial coordination through a designated skills authority. The third one refers to developing shared KPI frameworks across education, vocational education and training, and employment strategies in order to support alignment. The fourth one would be to use digital skills as a prominent one, as a lead entry point for cross-sectoral alignment. And the fifth one would be to build integrated financing and monitoring infrastructure as a coordinating package. These weaknesses all are interlinked, so addressing them separately produces limited results. But they also give a great scene for cooperation when it comes to different developing partners. And with this, I will close this presentation of the report. I really invite you to read the report when it's finalized and publicly available, of course, depending on ETF consent. And thank you for your attention. And I'm really happy, and I know my colleague Elma is also happy to take your questions and hear your reflections. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elma and Nina. Let me jump in again. I would just add that in addition to this cross-country report and these global lessons learned that you shared, you also have prepared 27 country analyses, which will also be available on request. So if you want to go into the details of a specific country, you will be able to see which strategies have been assessed against those different criteria. Thank you very much. So now we would move without further ado to the second study. I hope you can bear with us. It's a lot of content. But there's a kind of logical link between the first and the second study, actually, because you looked at the policy level, at the macro level, and how those things were organized with strategic documents. This is also one element that we considered for this mapping of the skills continuum and the assessment of the skills continuum in education system. But we shifted a bit the focus to also what happens within the education system, how this consistency is then carried out into implementation and ultimately into the actual teaching and learning of specific skills. So logically, we start with this policy level and to check how does the country articulate this vision regarding where and how a given skill should be developed from pre-primary, as our director was explaining, through to higher education. So how this skills continuum is effectively ensured. But as policy documents alone do not tell us the full story, we also looked at the operational dimensions, and I will present that in a moment. Last point to explain the framework of this study, we did not do that, let's say, out of the blue. We chose to take a specific skill or a specific competence because we use the term competence, although we are looking at the skills continuum, just to express the fact that it's not a simple technical skill, but a complex skill with different dimensions. And we took the sustainability competence to do that. So if we would share the slides, maybe Nicole, would you, or Hazel, perfect. So this is what this study is about, analyzing the skills continuum in a global education perspective. Let's move to the next one. So probably at this stage of the presentations and the explanations, you understood already the rationale for this study. The director also explained it clearly. The objective is really to make the case both at country and international level for an enhanced integration of VET and skills strategy in the education systems. So we want to go beyond indicators. There are a number of initiatives, let's say, supporting and encouraging the countries to measure how they integrate these skills. In particular, we have the Sustainable Development Goal 4.7.1, which regards the sustainable competence, which checks with this international monitoring whether policy, curriculum, teacher education, or assessment of learning outcomes are present in the strategies of the countries, but it did not really consider or measure whether they are coherent across the learner's journey. So we move to this level of analysis, the learner's journey. How is it organized, both in terms of content and in terms of pedagogical methods? So that's why what we did was to test if the components of the education systems, so meaning the different education levels, fit well together from preschool to upper secondary and beyond, to support the coherent acquisition of a specific skill. Then we used, as I said, the sustainability competence as a test case, anchoring the approach, the methodology into the Green Com framework, but also other reference documents developed at international level. And we analyzed to do so as a kind of test, let's say, or sample, very small sample, 3 countries, systems with the same methodology. So Ireland was taken as the EU member state to pilot the methodology, which was developed by our lead consultant Hazel, who will take the floor right after me. And then we took also the case of the Republic of Moldova and the Republic of Tunisia as 2 other cases from our partner countries to really see if this kind of methodology for assessing the skills continuum would work well. Today, as said before, we won't go into the details of the results by country, but this can be done after, especially on a bilateral basis. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we look at? I already anticipated a bit. So from the policy level, which is very similar to the work that was done in the other study, we looked at the curriculum and trying to examine how the learning standards, the subjects, the syllabus, and the specific education materials are used in the classroom. So really seeing how it is designed to be used in the classroom, actually. Then the third dimension of analysis was the teacher capacity. How are teacher training systems organized to make sure that these curricula could be well applied in the classrooms? The fourth dimension, which is equally important, was to analyze the learning environment, if they are conducive to the acquisition of those skills. So how are schools, can they really support the learning process? How are schools organized? Do they have the correct equipment to ensure that these curricula and the teacher capacity can be well implemented, can be well used at the school level? And last but not least, we looked also at the partnerships, obviously, because what happens at school does not make it, it's not complete. It does not ensure everything, but having some innovation, as was mentioned also in the previous study, or some partners from the civil society helping to implement the curricula can be of major added value as well. There was also, by chance, maybe a two-phase implementation process. It's also two, but it's a different nature. Whereas the first study was really a desk review, as you understood. This one combined a phase one, this study combined a phase one, which was the mandatory desk review. But then we also had, especially in Moldova and Ireland, a second phase, which was field work or fact-finding, let's say, actions with interviews, bilateral interviews, to make sure that the findings of the desk review were correct, and also to complement with some additional evidence provided by the stakeholders. Obviously, from these two phases, we have a triangulation of evidence to make sure that our findings are robust enough. Based on these elements of methodology, taking each dimension and then providing the evidence through these two phases, we were able to identify for each of the 5 dimensions a level for each country, what we call the characterization level, or the characterization levels of the system, which might go from absent, when really the evidence is fragmented and there's implicit or limited isolated elements of, or just in isolated initiatives, to the most, let's say, the most integrated level. So with the intermediary levels of characterization of the systems which are emerging or established, as you can see. So this is the analytical framework we applied and the process we implemented as well. We would now move to the main findings through our main consultant, Hazel. The floor is yours.
Go. Thank you very much, Marie. I'm going to give you a sense of what our findings were in relation to each of the dimensions, beginning with dimension 1, which is policy, strategy and governance. So the headline finding here is the contrast really between that high strategic ambition represented in various policy documents and legislation, and the much weaker operational translation. Every system we analysed had a dense policy architecture for sustainability. The strategies exist, interministerial commitments exist, constitutional language exists in some cases. What does not exist at the same level of maturity is the legal, financial and monitoring infrastructure needed to deliver any of it. We found 3 patterns which showed up consistently, that the interministerial coordination tended to be project-based rather than institutionally embedded. Sustainability falls between industry, energy, environment and education without any clear owner, taking responsibility for driving that. Monitoring, we found, was the weakest link, because implementation assigns actions without defined indicators. So progress reporting ends up describing activity rather than measuring impact. We also found that resourcing is overwhelmingly donor-driven, sitting outside recurrent education budgets. And the recommendations follow on from that diagnosis, really. Define measurable indicators, update foundational education laws where they exist prior to the sustainability commitments built on top of them, but also to move from these sectoral silos to a more unified competence framework that can span all those sectors. Finally, building the work into recurrent budgets rather than donor cycles. So moving on to dimension 2 then. If dimension 1 is about whether the system intends to deliver, dimension 2 is about whether the design holds together. And here we find the first sharp fault line, if you like. Curriculum frameworks across the 3 systems set ambitious sustainability expectations, but the assessment has not really caught up with that. Examinations remain focused on knowledge and recalling that knowledge at exactly the moment when the curriculum is calling for action and systems thinking. You know, that mismatch produces a predictable outcome in that teachers teach to the test and the test does not test what the curriculum says matters. So mapped against Green Comp, the coverage is uneven in a consistent way. Values and knowledge are well represented, whereas futures literacy agency and that collective action that we value so much, pretty thin by comparison. The systems are good at teaching learners about sustainability, but they're weaker at building the capacity to act upon it. So the third issue is progression then, sustainability records and, for example, projects that a learner has done, the competencies that they've developed are routinely sort of discarded really at those key transition points. So when students move from early years to primary to post-primary and so on, they have to start again almost. There's no portable record of what a learner has accumulated. So the recommendations here then are action-oriented assessment instruments, stronger futures literacy and agency at upper secondary, and a mechanism for sustainability records to follow a learner across transitions rather than restarting from 0 each time. So moving on to dimension 3, then this is the dimension I would ask you to remember, if you only remember one. Teacher preparation is the weakest dimension in every system we analysed. The same finding came back from 3 quite different country contexts, and it's a structural mismatch. You have the curriculum ambition that sits on top of teacher capacity that has not been built to deliver it. So the pattern has 3 layers. Initial teacher education addresses sustainability pretty well for science specializations, but for humanities, arts and civics teachers, it's treated as incidental, which is a problem because we consider sustainability to be a transversal competence, and most of these curriculum hours are taught by non-science teachers. So continuing professional development on sustainability is fragmented. It's funded by donors largely and rarely mandatory. And another issue is that the teacher educators themselves, the people training the teachers, often lack the preparation to model sustainability pedagogy. So we've got 4 recommendations which come out of that, being to specify minimum sustainability content in initial teacher education with defined credits and learning outcomes. Also make sustainability mandatory across all specializations, not just science. There's the need to establish credit-bearing CPD pathways recognised within the formal architecture rather than just those one-off workshops, but also to build capacity among teacher educators as a precondition for any reform. You know, that needs to come first or go hand in hand. So if we want to be honest about this, then no curriculum reform can outrun a teaching workforce that has not been prepared to deliver it. So dimension 4 then asks a slightly different question. Beyond the formal curriculum, does the institution itself behave as a sustainability environment? Talking about buildings, leadership, culture, school self-evaluation and accreditation. So the answer across all three systems is that whole institution sustainability is voluntary. Quality frameworks and accreditation standards do not require institutions to address sustainability beyond formal subject delivery. School leadership standards do not include sustainability expectations. And where whole institution work happens, and there are some striking examples of this, it concentrates in project-funded pilot schools rather than a system-wide approach. And that produces a familiar pattern in that we found pockets of excellent practice surrounded by institutions where nothing is required, nothing is mandatory. Pilot schools become showcases, they do not become the baseline. So the recommendations here are deliberately structural to embed sustainability in school accreditation requirements and in self-evaluation frameworks. Adding sustainability competence to school leadership standards as well, so that headship is not an optional driver. It's really led from the top. And a move from voluntary project schools to a national mandate where the learning environment is itself a pedagogical tool, including those buildings, governance, decision-making and procurement. All these have the opportunity to teach us something about sustainability. So then the final dimension 5, then partnerships and system connectivity. Dimension 5 connects all the formal system to everything outside it. Non-governmental organizations, civil society, environment, ministries, employers, universities, international partners. And here we find something genuinely interesting. Much of the action-oriented sustainability learning in these systems is happening through civil society partnerships rather than the formal curriculum. The NGOs are doing what the formal system is not, and that produces real innovation, but it also produces two serious problems. The first of these problems is equity. So if your access to action-oriented sustainability learning depends on whether your school has signed up to an external program, learner exposure becomes a bit of a lottery, postcode lottery. But the second problem then is durability. Partnerships are largely project-based and depend on donors. And when those funding cycles end, the innovations tend to disappear with it. We're watching good practice vanish because the system has no way of absorbing it. But there's also no coordinating framework. Multiple donors and NGOs are working in adjacent space without a national mechanism to align activity with national priorities, to set quality criteria, or to consolidate what works. So from those, we have developed 3 recommendations that institutionalize civil society partnerships, maybe through national registries, quality criteria, or absorption into line budgets. Also to establish a national coordination framework and to anchor NGO partnership roles in legislation so that they can survive funding cycles rather than depend on them. So if we move on then to some global messages, if I could hand over to my colleague, Wissam.
Thank you, Hazel. I'm Wissam. I was in charge of Tunisia assessment report. However, we have discussed thoroughly with Marie and the other experts, and we wanted to share 6 critical insights that challenge how we approach the skill continuum throughout the education systems. And I think most of them are aligned with what Elma and Nina has presented previously. So the first one, there is a high policy density that we have observed, but this does not automatically overcome what we call the legislative lag. In fact, sustainability strategies are recent in most of the countries because it's like 10, 20 years old. It coexists with foundational education statutes that predate them by decades. And until the core legal frameworks catch up with our strategic ambition, sustainability sits in transversal documents without the legal authority to mandate delivery in every classroom, curricula, and budget. So the recommendation here is that in the near future, we must focus on what we call the system enablers, namely laws, integrated governance, funding, in order to foster a true continuum in those education systems. As an example, in Tunisia, for instance, the constitution has created a new Supreme Council for Schooling and Education, and this council will have inside all the ministries in the workforce development system, but also all the human capital development, including culture, sports departments. The second insight is that coherence and integration are the next horizons. We have observed that many sectoral strategies and thematic strategies can see education system instrumentally, and they focus narrowly on immediate themes like water, energy, waste, and there is no systematic competence system that is present in there. And this system can score well on all the SDG 4.7.1 components, but at the same time would remain entirely fragmented and lack integration. The pattern is consistently very strong on design rather than delivery. And the advocacy in the future must target system coherence as the primary unit of analysis and try to help those countries in integrating those systems in order to make sure that all the departments work together with the same target. The third insight is that we should move from teaching about sustainability to empowering a generation to lead the transition. We have observed that those strategies, or what we have seen in the curricula, are based on knowledge dissemination. So it's knowledge-based curricula, and it recall-based assessment are necessary, but they are no longer sufficient. Without futures, understanding complex systems, and also fostering and focusing on action, all the learners gain knowledge of the problem, but they lack the capacity to act on it. If we move to the next page, please. The fourth insight is, and I think Hazel said previously, the teacher preparation is a universal bottleneck. In fact, across all system analyses, the teacher education is the single most critical dimension, because we have systems that include massive number of teachers. Some of them are there for decades. We have new skills that are happening, and we need to have a system to upgrade the skills of the teacher with the instrumental, I would say, and critical path to pass all the sustainability skills to the learners. So we need to help countries maybe to develop large-scale skill improvement for the teachers. And this is a huge challenge because we have multiple skills that needs to be upgraded. The fifth insight, we must recognize that partnerships with local ecosystems are the innovation engines. Currently, the most action-oriented sustainability learning happens through external partnerships rather than the formal curricula. So non-formal and informal learnings are extremely important, and they are the most innovative, flexible, and up to speed in order to bring all this knowledge to the students in the local communities. But relying purely on local initiatives, sometimes, as Hazel said, it produces inequitable learner exposure and project cycle vulnerability because they are relying on the financing of partners. So we must advocate maybe for an institutionalization of these partnerships and supporting them across all localities and all the parts of the system. Finally, this work extends beyond sustainability skills. In fact, the 5-dimension framework, the 4-level scale, and the gap analysis we developed apply to any transversal competence. For instance, we can apply it to citizenship. I've seen Nina and Elma talking about digital literacy, maybe critical thinking or metacognition. And I think by mastering this continuum, we can build a transversal skills framework that is a reference for all the country. It's global, and we can try, not necessary to put in it too many competencies, but these competencies of the 21st century must be identified and disseminated to all the countries. And also we can work with those countries on the continuum for these transversal 21st century skills. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Wissam and Hazel, for this presentation of the findings. There is one question maybe for you to reply in the chat if you can, Hazel, on the interesting, innovative practices that you would have come across for teachers. I leave it to you to write down if you have any hints on that. And as there are no other questions, as I can see in the chat, we would directly move to the panel discussion. Just 2 points to close on the study. We are very well aware that we have only 3 countries as a sample, so it's a very small sample. But the idea here was more to ring a bell and see if these kind of findings and recommendations, as you understood, the first one more focused on sustainability competence and the second more generalized to other components of the skills continuum, would apply equally to your country. And we would then probably open a channel for you to share your experiences and also broaden this way the sample of countries which went through this kind of analysis. But without further ado, I would pass the floor to my colleague, Hugues Moussy, who is head of unit of the intelligence unit in ETF, which is the unit under which the global education cluster lies. Hugues, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion. So today's conversation builds on the evidence and findings that we presented to you during this webinar, and we would like to confront it with a variety of institutional perspectives. So for that, we invited our 3 very distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them. First, Christine Hoffmann. Christine is Senior Regional Skills Specialist at the ILO Africa Skills Hub. Bart Staats is a Policy Analyst at the OECD Center for Skills. And finally, Claudia Pompa is a Program Specialist at UNESCO. So all 3 partners with whom we worked very, very closely. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today and bringing once again this institutional perspective and experience that is yours to this discussion. I will ask each of you the same 2 questions, and given the tight framework, I would kindly invite you to keep interventions as concise as possible, around 5 minutes. So let me turn to you first, Christine, for our first question. And the idea is, how do these studies and the findings that we presented resonate with your current efforts, and including the efforts to help countries ensure alignment with between their education and skills strategy, as well as to promote the skills continuum that we talk about in education system. Christine.
Thank you very much, Hugues, and good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure to be here and to contribute the ILO perspective to this important debate, and very happy to see that this continuum term has been taken up by ETF as well. So as ILO, I mean, we work a lot on policy integration. So not only skills into employment, but also employment into, social protection and skills for enterprise development. So all of that is this integrated perspective that we take. But the term continuum, and I was very intrigued by it, so is a term that our members, so I make the difference now between the International Labour Organization and the International Labour Office. Our members so far have not yet taken up. So we don't have any convention or recommendation that uses the term continuum. What you find in our official documents are the terms transition, school to work transition, life, work to work transition is the term ecosystem, so the skills ecosystem, something we use as well. And is the term flexible pathways. That's one of the pillars in our skills and lifelong learning strategy. Now, let me also mention the very new World of Work report that has been published 2 weeks ago on lifelong learning and skills for the future of work. And there's a lot of content in there on what we would call the continuum and those flexible pathways and lifelong learning systems. Now we have also, and so I'd also like to make promotion of a work that we have published, or that the International Labour Office has published on the education skills work continuum together with NORAC, and we also have some authors join the event today, so I greet them. So I edited this this publication where we where we gave a lot of different examples from countries where this continuum is embedded. And so what I liked about your presentation, your perspective, was that you were looking into the continuum in education and skills. But so we also need to connect it, further. Obviously, I mean, you also looked at the employment policies. So, but we need the policy perspective and we need the institutional perspective. And so we work a lot on this institutional capacity building with bodies that ensure that different actors come together. And I mean, you've referred to some of them as well, but there are those 6 sector skills bodies, ministerial task forces that are very important. And maybe to just pick up one point from our joint NORAC publication, which I find very important in this context of the continuums, is that very often we see that the more privileged people benefit from the seamless pathways, and the more disadvantaged ones are the ones that zigzag through the system. And so it's really about connecting systems and having those institutions in place. So I think that's where we really align very well.
Thank you, Christine, for this response. And it's interesting to see that we use different language, but try to affirm and look at the same thing in a way. Bart, same question that I will not repeat, but I turn to you now to respond.
Great. Thank you very much, Hugues, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting event. So actually, I really enjoyed the studies that were presented, and they're very relevant and resonate very well, strongly with the OSD's work on skill systems, skills governance, education, we do not use the term skills continuum, and it's also mentioned by UNESCO, but yeah, we do cover these topics in many different studies. I personally work a lot on skill strategies myself, so that's mainly what I will focus on in my intervention. But yeah, really one thing that stood out, I think, in the presentations was that yeah, skills development cannot be approached in silos, and that the skills continuum really requires these stronger links between education, training, labor market policies, industrial policy, and this is really at the heart as well of yeah, what the OECD tries to achieve. So yeah, our team, we've been worked with 26 countries on developing and implementing skill strategies at national, regional, and sectoral levels, and these include both between OECD countries, but also non-OECD countries. Like well, recently we worked with Thailand, for instance, as well as Malta. And I should clarify that it's not just about that. It really, we look at skills development across the life course, and we also use that the effective use of skills and the relevant governance arrangements for skill systems. But over the years, we really increasingly see that countries are becoming more and more aware of the need for this strategic and coordinated approach to skills policy. And that, yeah, this more medium to longer term plan is needed for skills policy. And yeah, I was very pleased to see that your study, the first one that was presented, really specifically focused on sort of the alignment of all the different strategies, and also yeah, the crucial role of FET and skill strategies in this context. So you need 12 of the countries in your sample we already have these kind of FET and skill strategies in place. So that was really great to see, and I can only confirm and reaffirm how important this alignment between strategies is. It was also one of our key takeaways actually of a study that we published in 2024, where we took stock of all the skill strategies that were developed in the European Union, and we really wanted to highlight this importance of aligning strategies to ensure that they have impact, to avoid overlap, and also to align skills policy with the broader social and economic objectives. And in practice, indeed, I can give an example. Like we work with Malta, we're developing a skills strategy, but they already have an education strategy in place. They have an innovation strategy, a lifelong learning strategy, but also a broader vision for 2050. So our strategy really supports and complements it by bringing it all together, and particularly actually supporting this vision. So making really a concrete effort to support the broader longer term objectives of the country. In the interest of time, I only want to highlight one other point, which might be important because, of course, we talk about lifelong learning here. And I just want to highlight that at OECD, we of course, put a lot of value at formal and non-formal education and training, which was also the focus here in many of the presentations. But also informal learning is very important, and our recent work on informal really highlights that indeed a very large share of skills development happens indeed outside the formal system through work, learning, interacting with peers, with families, with friends, by doing things on the job. And this is still very much underexplored and undervalued in skills systems. So our reports really try to make this more tangible, and we try to come up with a definition with clear guidance on how to further improve the measurement of informal learning, and we hope to do more work on that as well by diving more into the policy levers that can be considered. I could expand more on all these points and others, but I think I might leave it there for now. But thank you.
Thank you, Bart, and thank you also for reminding the importance of informal learning, because we know that informal learning is a place where a lot of learning happens, but most of the research on education and learning is on formal learning. So there is kind of a disconnect also between both of them. Claudia, it seems that ILO as well as OECD tend to be, it resonates, with what we do. What about UNESCO?
Thank you so much, Hugh, for an ETF, for this invitation and for this interesting discussion. I think the release of this research come also very timely as we start the discussion of the post-2030 agenda and trying to reimagine what the futures of education would look like, and what is the role really of training systems in this process and in ensuring that all individuals thrive. And I think here I want to focus in three key words that I think resonated with me, and I think with some of the work that we have been doing. And the words are, the number one is alignment, right? The need that we, despite many efforts, we're still seeing a consistent lack of alignment across systems. And therefore the question becomes, what are the incentives that we need then to ensure that alignment happens across systems? And incentives can be many ways, shapes, and forms, but also related to policies. So if we keep seeing this lack of alignment, this fragmentation, these silos happening, then what are really the policies that we should be putting in place to ensure that this alignment happens? And I think a very interesting and powerful learning is the one that comes from the regional bodies, such as the European Union, and the role they have also in providing this level of incentives to ensure alignment. And what can other regional bodies pick up from that? And how can we, international organizations, help in that aspect? And also here, and my third word, so after alignment and incentives, is also the issue of systems. We really need to think about all of these topics as ecosystems, because they cannot function alone. And I think here I pick up the point that Hazel made about teachers. We know that, for example, we're missing, UNESCO data shows that we're missing 44 million teachers around the world. So if on top of that you put the lack of training and the need to really promote a growth and lifelong learning mindset in the teacher workforce, it is really a monumental task, what we have, and challenge that we have ahead. So I think that, of course, these topics resonate with us. We are very keen to promote alignment, to promote incentives and systems, but also to reimagine the future of education. And I think I just want to end here with I'm coming really fresh and inspired from the Education World Forum. And somebody mentioned in one of the speeches that the gap between vision and action is where the futures get lost. And I think that's also something that came out very strongly in the reports, that we can have all the policies and good intentions, but if we are not ensuring operationalization, then we're really missing the target.
Thank you, Claudia. And when you remind that there's a need to hire and train 44 million teachers, you also point out to the fact that what we discuss is also linked to huge challenges, as you say, and volumes of actions and effort. So it's not something that is just right in the corner. I have a second question for you all, and let me stay with you, Claudia. I will do the reverse order now. How do you believe that you, as UNESCO, which is kind of leading in a way the international community on education, how can we join forces at international, regional, and national levels to better address what we call the skills continuum challenge?
I think that right now we have a very concrete and great opportunity ahead, which is rethinking, as I mentioned, rethinking the future of education. As you know, UNESCO is a custodian for SDG 4, and we're in charge of monitoring process. The reality is that in many aspects, SDG 4 will not be met. And that makes us and forces us to really think about how do we think about education in the years to come, and what of what has not been met we still need to keep as a priority, and what new ideas we're going to bring to the table. And I think this is not only an abstract thinking, but also call to action as we start the process of engagement and consultation on this, for us to participate at all levels and to really bring different voices to the table. So not only international organizations, not only at the regional level and at the policy level, but we also need the voices of teachers, we need the voices of young people, we need the voices of employers and the private sector, of civil society, because education at the end is for all of us. And so if we ensure that our education that education really works as a system and that is aligned across the continuum, then we can really ensure a prosperous future for all citizens.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for this positive and optimist also call. Bart, how can you join forces?
Yes, thank you. And I think that's a very good question. I think the first point, looking sort of at the national level, I think it will be very important also to take a more joint approach, of course, to the Skills Continuum Challenge. And a lot already has been said about that. Also, the importance of the relevant bodies. You need skills coordination bodies that bring indeed the ministries as well, all the stakeholders together to talk about this topic. I think that's a very important element and also something we really touch upon in our work at the OECD when we're developing skills strategies. And one key finding I noticed indeed working in practice with many of the, for instance, skills councils that exist across at the OECD is that really the design and effectiveness of these bodies really depend on how they are designed and who's involved. There's always a risk of these clubs being sort of more of a talking club, but they really need to have an impact. So they need to have clear mandates. Then their discussions need to be based on shared evidence. There need to be linked to a strategic vision. So I think really the design of these bodies is very important for them to be effective. But yeah, as well as of course at an international level, I think international organizations have a very important role to play. By providing the relevant evidence as well as by providing relevant platforms. It's really good to see that also ETF is organizing like the Skills Summit, that there are many organized workshops like this organized, but the OECD does the same. We also have like an OECD Skills Summit. We have peer learning workshops where we bring it together all the different representatives from OECD countries and beyond to talk about the shared challenges and the shared solutions that exist. Because really attending these events, always one of the key findings is how everybody is effectively facing the same issues. There's a lot of evidence on what could be done, but how to do this really in practice and moving towards implementation. That's really one of the challenges there. And I'll leave it there. Well, the final point I want to make is about also the importance of aligning the work of international organizations, because of course there's a lot happening at EDF, UNESCO, ILO, OECD, but of course it's also important that we coordinate among ourselves and support that we are as effective as we can be. And I think there are many good initiatives related to that, and one particularly that comes to mind is like this Towards a Global TVET Agenda initiative funded by the German government, where we bring all the organizations are brought together to come up with more of a structured plan on how to strengthen TVET. But that's a good example that could be hopefully replicated also for other parts of the skill system.
Thank you, Bart. And if we work with countries to better align or ensure a continuum, we should also do the same, I think, in terms of the international organizations that we are. Christine, how do we better maybe work together or strengthen our common action?
Yes, thanks so much. No, I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. I think there's maybe opportunity as well, Bart, beyond the global VET agenda and our collaboration. There you mentioned informal, non-formal learning as part of this lifelong learning and future skills global research that our research colleagues in collaboration with Skills have done. We've developed a lifelong learning survey methodology, and we've used it only in 3 countries. But if there's interest to do that in other countries applied, we'd be very happy to partner. With UNESCO as well, we've published a nice joint inter-ministerial governance paper. So doing those resources where we get together, we think together, and we put all our institutions' logos. I think that's obviously also a good sign to our partners, because they see that we speak with one voice and don't run as competitors. So international level, exactly just the type of things you're doing here, joint events at regional level. Now let me talk a bit about Africa as well,
Yes.
so, because that's where I'm based. There's the challenge, obviously, also among our partners. So when we work with the African Union, they have education and labor into different divisions. So we try to work with both and bring our partners together for coordination. We're working together with ETF now as well under the ACQF initiative on some model joint occupational multi-country standards. So that's a nice thing and collaboration. And obviously at national level, just like what Bart and Claudia said, it's strengthening the governance mechanisms. As ILO, we would obviously look at tripartite mechanisms where workers and employers are involved through social dialogue that happens, in the social dialogue institutions, but it also happens in institutions of on skills, for example, and that ties, I think, very importantly to one of the points you raised, that financing can act as a mechanism, is probably the weakest link so far to connect the different spheres. And we have training funds in Africa in 25 countries. So those training funds usually bring employers and also workers and different government actors together. So we have a space where those important actors discuss and could solve those continuum issues. Many deal with continuing training only, but some also deal with initial training. So it's really these types of institutions, the sector skills bodies I already mentioned, that are very important to strengthen. And last point, we'll be responding to Wissam, who is mentioning the needs and the disadvantaged youth. So they're under the SDG indicators 8, so in addition to 4. And then, we have, several others. But it's really to make a difference for needs where those different systems, active labor market programs, the initial skills training, the continuous skills training, all can come together and offer services in a seamless way for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you very much. And very important that you reminded us with the importance of financing and structures that you have within the under the African Union, and also Africa. At ETF, we mostly work with the European neighborhood, but also collaborate with the African Union and some African countries. And we all know here that Africa, because, but not only of its demography, is really not only an important, but a growing continent here. It's 3:29, so not to mention that we are coming at the end of this webinar. Fortunately, I don't really have time to summarize everything because it would have really been a challenge, both listening to people and summarizing, but there are a lot of things that were, of course, presented. And thank you also for our 3 panelists for these different institutional perspective and for bringing your experience into this discussion. Let me finish by saying just a few things about the next step. So as the presenters said, the studies are now being finalized and the reports will be published and available soon in the upcoming weeks. So of course, we will inform you by email. Second point, the competence that we focused on, the sustainability competence, as you understood very well, was considered as an initial example. And we would like to pursue the exercise with other competencies. We are in particularly thinking about the citizenship competence directly related to also the support for democracy, which I think in the world we live in is not a luxury. And we also have what we call the Torino Skills Summit. We know that you, OECD, also have a Skills Summit. It's different, but I think there's room for many summits around this issue. This summit will be in November and provide all of us with the opportunity to move on and continue this discussion, and also hear more directly from partner countries' experiences that were not present here. So in the meantime, I would like, on the behalf of all the team, Marie, of course, Elma, and all other colleagues, to thank you warmly for your time, participation, interest, and wish you a very good end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.